Hello, and thank you for joining us for this conversation in a sequence of conversations that we're having with artists that we work with. Today, we're really pleased to be joined by the Ulster Orchestra's honorary principal guest conductor, Jac van Steen. Jac, thank you very much for joining us this week and
Pleasure.
For this project. We've just finished three really intensive days of recording two pieces by Weill. Two pieces that I suppose are not typical of Weill when we think of him in the popular realm, when we know of him from Threepenny Opera and Mahagony and things that we're more familiar with from the later part of his life. But these are earlier works and conceived in kind of conventional symphonic mode rather than music theatre.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. There is an interesting period in Weill's life where, for obvious reasons, he had to get away out of Germany and lands in Paris, amongst other places, and later in America. And this Kurt Weill that we hear is at first ear and at first sight pretty serious. We recorded a symphony. It has nothing to do with the musical side of it and the Mac the Knife. Although there are some quotes of the Threepenny Opera and, as you say, Mahagony and Zilberzee, and you can sort of already see in a nutshell that music is coming up a lot later. But the symphony, as well as the violin concerto, are considered to be the serious concert program works. And the speciality of it is written in commission, like Poulenc got a commission, Stravinsky, all the same countess who had money for the arts and money for composers. And Kurt Weill was one of them. And there we are in exact the right atmosphere of the early 30s for our orchestra. In terms of the setting, it's not too megalomane, it is not Richard Strauss with 100 people on stage. So it is also from the practical point of view, it's a Beethoven orchestra with the sound of Kurt Weill. And that's for the symphony. For the violin concerto, we have the speciality that only of the string orchestras there are only 4 basses involved, which is also pretty awkward for a symphony orchestra to play it in a normal concert program. But now we could present it in combination with the symphony as a very serious violin concerto for violin, winds, and for double basses and percussion. Don't forget the xylophone in the second movement, where you already hear the lighter stuff of the musical type of it, of the theatre music, which is very colourful.
I'm particularly pleased, I think, with this project because it grew out of something that the orchestra was doing with you last year. So in COVID times, we were having conversations about smaller formations for the orchestra that would work at social distance, but still be substantial enough pieces of music, things with real musical substance. And that's where we started to work on the violin concerto. We have our leader, Thomas Koshy, on this recording working with us. How's that been working with Thomas? What has he brought to this particular recording?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because the Weill violin concerto, playing with your leader in the orchestra, gives a special sort of bond between the orchestra and the leader and myself, because we present him now as if he would be the guest soloist in front of the orchestra. And as the Ulster Orchestra is very privileged with a leader of that quality, he really can play a good concerto. And in that case, I appreciated a lot that the leader takes up the stamina and the work to learn a work that is not a Beethoven, or in his country language, the Bartók or the Sibelius, a thing that you learn at school. Kurt Weill is not a education #1 piece. So you have to really go for it. And that's the thing that we both said, okay, if we're gonna do Kurt Weill, it is also because, as you say, COVID time, we want a piece for the winds and brass in the orchestra. Okay, 4 basses, just out of the simple fact that we were in the first COVID times 3 meters apart. So you have on the stalls of the Waterfront Hall, you have the space of a football field, and there you play with about 30 odd players. And Tamas took up this challenge, and he did extremely well. And then sort of the next step is doing it first for radio BBC Northern Ireland, and then picking it up for a real production CD, which is one step further. You have a bit more time, you take a bit more challenges, and the ideal thing is that we some moment in the future we can present both works to the audience in a normal program. And then we have again a win-win situation where a not so well-known piece, if it is well coordinated and well put in the program, it can be absolutely stunning.
It's a piece that really deserves its place in the repertoire. It's pure music, it's a proper classical orchestra, classical symphony, and yet it's got lost. And I suppose it's just one of those sort of quirks of history, the time that it was written, the things that were happening in Europe at that time, the 1920s and 30s, what then happened to Weill himself, and needing to move away from Europe, that just as a pure result of that, the piece gets lost.
Yeah. Forgotten.
Yeah. Well, I suppose just hasn't found its place in the repertoire that it really should, and I'm really glad that we've been able to record it and bring it to another audience. So there's another actor in this recording that we've put together this week. And it's worth talking about perhaps for people who don't know the Ulster Orchestra, don't know Belfast and don't know our venues. And it's this hall itself, the Ulster Hall, the orchestra's spiritual home. We've spent a long time in the Waterfront Hall, which is a big modern hall in Belfast, which we love, but there's something about the orchestra coming home. How does it feel to be back here after such a long break?
That is very special to be back in the Ulster Hall. We must not forget this is one of the instruments around the orchestra, the acoustical instrument. The Ulster Hall, 1840-ish built, completely perfect architecture, looks fantastic, sounds good, but we didn't, as you say, we didn't play there for more than 1.5 years. And Waterfront Hall was fantastic, and we were very warmly welcomed. But that was a situation where you cope with COVID and social distancing. And this week, being in this hall and the first, it's like if you are a violinist for the first time back on your Stradivari that you didn't play on for a few years. And it was for also the spirit in the orchestra was so positive. And the Ulster Hall is part of the identity of the Ulster Orchestra. And the label where we record for, the SOM label, will be very happy to hear the Ulster Orchestra in its own habitat, in its own sort of surrounding. And for us, it was like coming home in a warmly welcomed environment.
We're really, really pleased to have had you, Jac, as part of this recording. One final question about the symphony, perhaps. The symphony itself is not programmatic. There's no kind of overt theme to it, but listening to it this afternoon, and particularly the very sort of strident, martial kind of language to it, there's a kind of a pungency, there's a sort of edge to some of that music. Is there something in there that you think that Weill is reflecting of the times in which this was written, a sort of sense of oncoming threat and danger in that music, or do you just see it as purely symphonic language?
No, I don't see it as just a purely symphonic language, although I can enjoy the purely symphonic language as it is so well crafted. We must not forget, you almost smell Berlin in the symphony. So we had the First World War, then is this interbellum between what's coming up, it's the 30s. Kurt Weill, being Jewish, the world completely upside down, and there is this march in the last movement where you think there is something threatening coming up. There is a military aspect in it. Sometimes the string orchestra is completely used as percussion, as the snare drum of a military band. So there is nothing really programmatic, but you can't exclude the cosmos of Weill's life. And that's what you hear in this. It's a three-part symphony. A first movement with a slow introduction, a very nice largo in the second movement, and an enormous virtuosic last movement. And we must also not forget the huge loss that we don't know this music can only be held by ambassadors like ourselves, the orchestra, yourself, and me as a conductor, to bring that back in the repertoire. Must not forget that if you look at the status of the symphony, Bruno Walter, Klemperer, they all conducted that work because they knew and heard and read that it was a top quality work. So, but you smell the interbellum between the two world wars, and I almost see Berlin in front of me, especially sort of the then East Berlin side of it.
Yeah. It's a really important work. I'm really pleased that we've been able to put it together after some time in the planning. This is something that we'd thought about quite some time ago, so really glad that it's found its way through.
Me too.
And really hope that that people listening to this and engaging with the disc really enjoy it and take these works to their hearts, because I think they really deserve to. Jac, thank you very much.
Pleasure.